Welcome to Amateur Hour CX, a podcast on the state of cycling from our point of view in the grassroots ranks. Or pretty much whatever strikes Eric's fancy based on who he could trick to come on the show today. I'm Mark Walling, and here's your host, Eric Schillinger.
Thanks, Mark. Our guest today on Amateur Hour CX is Scott Birdsey. Scott is the promoter of the Uncle Sam Cyclocross GP and a Category 3 cyclocross racer. Scott and I have been talking over the last few months about the nature of the sport of cycling and its tendency to draw people in to the culture of the sport in a way that is not typical in your typical sport. There's a quote that is attributed to Ernest Hemingway, and as you'll hear during the episode, may or may not be his quote, that I thought was particularly appropriate for the conversation of cyclocross as a sport or not. And that quote is very straightforward. Hemingway said, "Auto racing, mountaineering, and bullfighting are the only true sports. The rest are merely games." Now our question today, if Hemingway was here in the 21st century looking at a cyclocross race, would it be a sport or a game? We'll get to that with Scott Birdsey after this. So we should actually talk, though. We should actually get some structure to this because we've talked a lot about structure. I'm Eric Schillinger, and if you're listening to this, you probably know me at this point, but just in case you don't, I am a local attorney and the longtime promoter of the Nycross Cyclocross Series here in upstate New York. And we've put together a show today where we wanted to talk about some of the most basic things in cycling, which is the whole concept of the cycling lifestyle, the idea ultimately of bike racing is life and the rest is just details, or alternatively, a quote that I previously incorrectly attributed to Ernest Hemingway, which is everything in life. No, I'm sorry. Everything. We'll edit this out. The Hemingway quote, which it turns out it's not a Hemingway quote. I got to look it up here. Mark, fact check me on this. It's not Hemingway. It's attributed to Hemingway. It's not. I wasn't the one who incorrectly attributed it. It's commonly said that Ernest Hemingway said this. Turns out he didn't. Somebody else did. But it goes right along.
I thought it was him.
Yeah, it goes right along with the Hemingway spirit, and it's this. There's only three real sports: auto racing, mountain climbing, and bull riding. Not bull riding. We're going to have to edit that out.
There are only two sports, bullfighting, motor racing, and mountaineering. All the rest are merely games.
There are only three real sports: auto racing, bullfighting, and mountaineering. All the rest are just games. That's the quote, and it's not actually a Hemingway quote.
Actually, it is.
No, it isn't. It's some other guy.
I'm on Quora.
All the rest.
Regardless of who said it, the question is, would cyclocross, if it had been around, it probably was, there's probably dudes in Belgium like jumping over fences or something in the winter, but regardless of who said the quote, if cyclocross had been around, would that have been included in the list?
Exactly. My guest today is racer extraordinaire and the promoter of the notorious Uncle Sam cyclocross race, Scott Birdsey, who's here to talk about just these things. And I think that the reason Scott and I wanted to talk about this is two things. First of all, Scott proposed to me this idea, which is pretty straightforward. He said to me one day that cycling is not really a sport, which of course immediately made me think about the Hemingway quote. He said it's just a life, that you just do it and you have to completely live it. And I don't know that I agree about that. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. But Scott Birdsey, he threw that idea out there. Cycling's not even a sport. It's just 100% your lifestyle. If you want to be a cyclist, you just live cycling and that's it, and you don't do anything else. And we've been there. Some of us have done that. Some of us are still doing it. That's the conversation for today. Before we get into that,
all right. So I want to tweak that a little bit. And my memory of it is I said that bike racing is not a sport; it's a culture. That's all I remember saying.
Oh, that is what you said. That's 100% what you said. Actually, it's a culture.
But the thing is, the more I was actually thinking about it today because I knew we were going to talk about it, and I kind of feel like I don't have anything to actually back up that statement. I think it's just a statement. Like sometimes I just make up things to say because they sound profound. And
Are you a lawyer?
I don't know if philosophically I have the chops to back up that statement. So maybe we can figure out whether it's actually just real or just garbage. I'm not sure.
Before we get into that, we'll break all that down, and maybe I'll agree with you in that, and maybe I won't. Maybe we'll just break it down. Why don't you? Well, before you tell us a little bit about how you got sucked into this culture or sport, I would like to describe for our listening panel of 3 people and my dog what our first interaction was. And I don't know if you remember our first interaction. Do you have any idea what the first time that we interacted was?
So from my memory, the first time we interacted, it was on Facebook when I messaged you asking for a volunteer job for Uncle Sam. But then,
yes, exactly.
Yes.
Okay, so I was going to actually go back in time and look up the Facebook message and then just read it today, but I couldn't find it, which sounds ridiculous because I thought I could just scroll all the way back up to our now like literally 50,000 message Facebook Messenger chat, and you're a computer guy, so maybe you can do it and I can't, but it seems to cut off. Facebook Messenger apparently just doesn't go back into infinity.
They just don't save things.
Yeah, like, or maybe they just selectively were like, this is stupid, we're not preserving it.
We've killed a lot of work hours.
Here's the thing. This is maybe something we shouldn't reveal to the public. We've spent so much time talking to each other on Facebook Messenger, obviously not during work hours,
yes,
that Facebook Messenger has been overwrought with things we've written and can't preserve it all. That being said, your messages were the most obnoxious and sarcastic I want to be a volunteer messages that I've ever gotten. And at the time, you didn't know this because you didn't know me. At the time, I was looking for someone to take over promoting the entire race, and you were just volunteering to like maybe help a little bit. And the style of horrible sarcasm that you used made it clear to me that you were destined to take over running the race. Essentially, from that moment, I was like, oh, I'm going to be friends with this stranger. He's super weird. And now we're recording a podcast together.
Right. So you made me your results, assistant results collator for running results live during the race.
And the rest is history. Thanks to you, we ran the best version of the race we've ever run, according to some of our very fine, customer feedback that we got from the past season.
Yeah. So that was, let's see, just this past year was year number 3 of Uncle Sam with you and me, and that was the year we brought Mark in.
Mark, are you there?
Hi.
And so that's all 3
of
us.
And that's it. That's all 3 of us.
And my story is kind of scarily similar to Scott's, except switch out you for Scott and me for Scott.
We just asked for work because we don't want to pay race fees.
No, I started by, well, it wasn't that. It was, I started by just saying, Scott, hey, let me volunteer next year. This was a lot of fun. I want to help out. And suddenly I'm the co-promoter.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I remember you said, you were like, I would be up for doing something more than just like a normal volunteer person, like, fixing course tape.
Yeah, I did registration. I did PM registration. Literally, I handed like 4 people a binder and a pen.
Yeah, that's an easy job. That's an easy job.
If you're listening to this and you're looking for a volunteer job next year, snatch up PM registration guy.
Yeah, that's definitely the best
Although
job.
when we reveal the upcoming series tweaks, maybe that'll change.
That's true. PM could get a lot more.
Or a lot less. Who knows? You'll never know until you hear about those upcoming series tweaks.
That's true. I'm still excited to see what the final verdict is going to be for the schedule.
I think we have, well, you got to now sell it on the individual promoters, but I think the schedule that we've been talking about, which we will reveal in another episode, is the schedule that we'll go with. So, Mark, my favorite thing about meeting you was the same thing. You offered to help, and then you insisted on doing more and more and more. And when I was like, this guy's kind of crazy, he's also helping a lot. Your actual thing that you said to me was, well, I'm a volunteer fireman, so I'm used to just running into fires for free, so this is really no big deal compared to that. You want me to stand around all day holding a binder? No problem.
Yeah, and then when I ran out of steam from just onslaughting local businesses with Facebook messages to give us free stuff for prizes and for food, that was like by the week of Uncle Sam, I was like, I'm pretty exhausted doing this. And then Mark was like, hey, I'll just do everything else for the actual event.
And a beautiful relationship was born.
I like the term technical director.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head.
I stole it from Adam.
Yeah, it's fun to come up with job titles, don't you think?
Okay, so it is. What's my job title now?
Yeah, I mean, you have the most freedom to come up with a job title, so you can get really weird with it if you want.
I
to.
would like to be
Benevolent dictator for life.
dictator. No, I don't. There's no way on that.
Benevolent dictator for life.
Benevolent. I'm not. That's the part that's not. That's the part we cross off.
No, you're like a philosopher king.
Yeah. I like that idea. Like Plato.
Because you do like to expound. You know, you like to give reasons. You like to give explanations for your decisions and things like that.
Well, I think it's. I don't know if it's my training that makes me do that, or if it's. I mean my professional training, or if it's my brain. My lawyerings, or if my brain pointed me into the realm of I have to be a lawyer because that's how I think, and people that I talk to all say that I selected the only profession I could possibly have. So I suppose it maybe is both of them.
Yeah.
So expounding on things, what we're here to really talk about is whether or not your statement of bike racing is a culture, it's not really a sport. And I'm paraphrasing now. I don't know if you declared it as a sport or not, but that's where we're going. Is this a sport, or is this just a lifestyle culture thing that's an amorphous blob and it's not a football game? Now we know it's not a football game. The number of people who I saw posting on Facebook last night during the Super Bowl. Now we've revealed our timing delay, so if we actually air this in the fall, it won't make sense. But
Today's Tuesday. You see people who are cyclists posting ironic statements anytime there is a major sporting event. If it's the Super Bowl, they post "Woo go sports ball." If it's the World Series, someone comments about how boring baseball is. Cyclists do not like ball sports. That's like a requirement of being a cyclist, theoretically. I like ball sports. I like to watch baseball. But most cyclists, as a cliche, don't. When I had my first job in the bike industry, working in Dick's Sporting Goods in the bike department, the manager of the store came up to me one day and he inquired inquisically if I liked sports. And I was the guy in the bike department at the sporting goods store, and my answer was just yes. What do you mean do I like sports? And then he said, well, most bike guys don't like sports. And then he sort of just walked away. Like it was like either I was lying and I didn't like sports, or bike guys don't like sports. That doesn't make sense.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I fit that perfectly. I have never watched sports like my whole life. I did actually watch the Super Bowl this weekend, and I was actually pretty into it. But aside from that, I've never watched sports. I never played sports or anything. But cycling for me is different.
So what's different about it? Why is cycling something that sucks you in when you don't have any interest in throwing a ball through a hoop?
There's two things. The first thing is the actual like physical act of cycling. It's basically just flying, and that to me is pretty fun. That works out for me pretty good. Just like flying around, exploring roads and trails works super good for me. Like my type of personality, a little ADD, like exploring things, like going fast. I mean, it doesn't get any more like complicated than that. Like that's just the reason I like doing it. But then the second thing is going back to the culture argument, which is I don't think it's that other sports are not cultures. It's that the cycling culture is just different because it's more inclusive than your average ball sport. It's much more inclusive in that the events you go to, the races, 99% of them, at least in America, are put on by your peers at the grassroots level, like what we do. And, you can race on the same roads or trails or tracks or whatever with the elites or the pros that show up, if you go to a big enough race. And you've got all these people making up their own teams and clubs and making their own clothes. And it's just way more accessible and kind of with the times to me, in terms of you can just build stuff on your own, like what we're doing right now. We're making a podcast on our own with no budget, And that's, to me, that's very like cycling. Whereas I watched the Super Bowl this weekend, and like I said, like I literally, like I'm not even lying, where I haven't watched sports in like at least a decade, and it was crazy to me how much money and like theater and like polish and sheen that they put on stuff like that on the Super Bowl. Like it was just unreal to me compared to like just like going on YouTube and watching, you know, the World Cup that morning, or the world champion rather. So that's what is going on in my head.
So I have a counterpoint to that.
Shoot.
How much does a new bicycle cost?
It costs as much or as little as you want it to.
Well, that's not fair. That's not really true.
Wait, which one of you two is the lawyer?
So this is one of the major issues. The entry cost to cycling is different. In my office today, we were talking about how much it costs to do Little League. One of my staff members' sons was signing up for like 4-year-old T-ball. How much do you think 4-year-old T-ball costs?
$50 a season.
$68. You gotta have a glove. You don't even have to have a bat. They give you a bat if you don't have one, right? My secretary thought that was kind of expensive, and maybe she was like, for 4-year-olds running around a t-ball field, $68 seems like a lot. And I was like, well, you gotta have the field. I mean, and they gotta probably pay the umpires or something. I don't know. I mean, there's some costs associated with it, and I couldn't help but immediately go into that promoter brain of saying, well, how many kids do you have on the team, and probably what's the cost of? I'm sure the land that they play t-ball on is probably a park or something. It's probably municipal property, so maybe there's no cost to actually have it. But you set all that up, and you have to sort out how to pay for the concessions or pay for the insurance, and the next thing you know, it probably costs a fair amount of money to run it. When you compare that to cycling, running a local race, or not running it, I should say, but participating in a local race, well, if you want to be a Cat 5, if you want to go out and buy an entry-level cyclocross bike, I mean, $1,000? You think you can get one for $1,000?
The base Trek, I think, is $1,100.
Right. And, you know, you might be able to find one for a little less than that, but I think that's a safe bet. $1,000, $1,100. And really, as snobby amateur bike racers, none of us would want to really race that bike. You'd want one that's 2 notches better, you know?
True.
Just ask Brian Wood when he gets on my bike.
Well, you have the aluminum Trek, right?
We have the same frame. I have the better group set.
Well, there you go. I mean, look, I changed just from 105 to Ultegra on my bike, and I thought it made like a huge difference. And that's a crazy thing to do. But I happened to, I got the hydraulic brakes. I switched to the hydraulic brakes. Here's the point. The cost of entry is substantial in that you need to come up with $1,000 or more just to get the baseline equipment, and that doesn't include your helmet, and it doesn't include some appropriate clothing to wear or shoes or any of that. So one of the factors is cycling is super expensive. To get into it, you have to be able to produce the money. That's one of the inhibiting factors. That's why we don't have any kids racing. It's primarily, 35 to 55-year-old professional dudes doing it, guys who have either expendable income or really, I mean, that's it. They have expendable income. If you don't, you can't afford to do it. So I don't know if that makes it not a sport, but it changes the approach to how it is. But I don't think cost is it. I don't think cost is the issue. I think that it's something different, which I think we can explore through Scott. Scott, when did you actually start riding bikes?
Okay, so I started riding bikes maybe about 5 years ago. My dad had a couple of Cannondale Synapses, and I've been into motorcycles, like dual sport, riding around on trails and like fire roads. I was always into that, and I was also really into building up old 70s mopeds, like the ones that actually have pedals on them, and you start the engine by pedaling the moped.
Yeah, you were actually the leader of a moped
gang,
right?
I had a moped gang. You can go on mopedarmy.com. There's a whole subculture on it. It's the same vibe as cyclocross. It doesn't take itself very seriously, and a lot of it is just people having fun. But then you also had guys like me that were getting pretty like deep into the trying to make the stuff go fast, like trying to get a moped to go 65.
That seems like a very bad idea.
It weighs 100 pounds.
Bad idea, yeah. Well, I can see that's why totally. Eventually you stopped doing the moped army.
Yeah. So anyway, yes. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I always smoked too. And so I got on my dad's bike a couple times and went down the road with him. And
do you know why he had
I think,
2 Cannondale synapses?
well, it was my stepmom's bike, and I would just ride hers because we're about the same height.
I see.
I guess she's a little shorter, but it was enough for me to ride and try it out. And yeah, I mean, it was super fun. And so when I really got seriously into it was when like 3 years ago, there was the first Andy Ruiz here was doing the Farmer's Daughter gravel ride here for the first time. And I was sort of like, that whole like gravel riding thing became apparent to me as a thing you could do on a bike. And like I said, I was into trail riding motorcycles. So I was like, oh, this could be like a good alternative to that, especially if I want to quit smoking and like be healthy. So I bought a Colnago cyclocross bike from down the road here in Albany. And I talked to Andy, and he was because he needed motorcycle marshals for the ride. And so I rode my motorcycle, making sure everybody was safe. And
so you didn't do the ride, you moto marshaled the ride.
Yeah, I already had the cross bike, but I'd only had a cross bike for like 2 months, and I knew that the ride was just like wicked hard, and I didn't even want to like I wasn't even going to try it because I knew it was super hard, and I'd done like 10-mile rides, but I had I have this sweet BMW dual sport motorcycle, so I just bombed down the roads watching all these people.
That's how you would get me to do the Farmer's Daughter if I could do it on a dual sport BMW.
It's so much more fun.
Now you've done it both ways, so now you know, right?
So yes, exactly. So when you're doing it on a motorcycle, you just get to bomb down dirt roads on the wrong side of the road, passing cyclists to make sure everyone is doing okay, and handing out water bottles. And
this is
it's pretty fun.
This is one of the craziest micro things about cycling. So I've never ridden a motorcycle, but I have driven the pace car at the tour of the Battenkill for the women's pro race, right? And it's the same thing. You're driving along and on a descent on a dirt road on a bicycle, a pro female racer can go pretty fast, right? It can go 40, 50 miles an hour, maybe the hills aren't that big, so they're not hitting like 60, but descending at a rate of speed. You would not want to drive a Mark IV Golf GTI down a dirt road.
Oh yeah, I actually moto marshaled before I was into racing bikes myself. I moto marshaled the Wilmington Whiteface race, and I remember we would on some of those steeper grade gravel roads, the motorcycles would pull over to let the cyclists pass because they're going so fast. So I think it's just watching enough of that, particularly the off-road stuff for me, got me really hooked, and started going on group rides, and that was it for me.
Okay, so you start going on group rides, and then pretty quickly, so let's see, what year was the first Farmer's Daughter? Was that 14?
I think it was
this is the third year.
I think it was 15.
15. This is the third year.
It was 15. This is the fourth year.
No,
this is the fourth. This is the fourth year.
So
I can't do math.
So then you start doing some group rides, and then you get the idea that you're going to do some racing, and you go to the cyclocross race, right? You go to the Uncle Sam race. It was I know you told me before, it was the first race you did actually, right?
Yep. I started doing shop rides. I remember the first ride I went on where like we were doing like a real serious actual like tempo ride, and I just felt like my heart was going to explode. And at the end of the ride, I was like pretty psyched that I felt actually pretty good. So like I learned how to recover from doing a hard effort for the first time ever. And I think that was the addiction. And then, the first racing I did, friends were doing cyclocross, and friends that I'd been riding with all summer, they were racing cross. So And
you'd bought a cross bike, but basically to do gravel riding. If it was 2018, you might have been sold a gravel bike and not gotten a cross bike, right?
Yeah. So like the typical like millennial nerd, like I wanted a bike that could do everything. So I went on the internet, and at the time they were like marketing adventure bikes, which were like basically just a cyclocross bike, but maybe with more of like a relaxed endurance geometry. So I almost got one of those, but then I went into the local bike shop here, and they had the cyclocross bike there in front of me, and I was like, I just want a bike right now. So I just bought that instead.
Good decision.
I used the cross bike on the road for like a year, year and a half or something before I got an actual road bike. I just had like different, I thought it would just be really cool and like totally, like sufficient to have like a couple wheel sets, like have my road wheel set and have my gravel wheel set and like just have this one frame. And obviously that turned out that doesn't actually work if you're serious about either one of them. But
I remember my first year riding, it was going behind Scott up Thatcher Park. He's like dogging it, trying to get up the hill. And like, I'm still out of shape, Mark. And I thought Scott was, hot shit. And he's like falling back, going up the hill. And I'm like, huh. And then everyone at the top is like, oh yeah, he's on a cyclocross bike. And I'm like, really? That makes that much of a difference?
That makes that much of a difference.
yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't the lightest cross bike you could buy.
If you're on a 22-pound beginner cyclocross bike. So
yeah, it was a lower level
now,
cross bike.
when we said that everyone should start racing bikes and you could get into it for $1,100, how was your experience riding that bike?
I mean, it worked out great. Once I got the road bike, it was pretty amazing when I got the road bike, obviously, because I went about twice as fast, and that was when
resistance training.
Yeah, right. But I mean, the cross bike was good enough.
Okay, so now we're talking about Scott starts riding. Scott tries a race. At that stage of your life, do you have a training plan?
No. I did a full season of cross. I wanted to do 10 races to upgrade, and that was my only goal. I didn't have any any expectations.
You were just trying to just show up and do a bunch of races.
Yeah, it was just for the love of it.
How many rides per week were you doing?
Like, 2 or 3, and definitely no power meter or any stuff like that. No idea what a FTP test was or
now,
VO2 max.
Hold on here, Haas. Let's not get that far ahead because you might need to explain that to our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. I can.
When you say you're doing 2 or 3 rides a week, were you still smoking then, or are you done smoking by then?
No, I was done smoking, done vaping,
okay.
Done with all that. I did yeah.
You're doing 2 or 3 rides a week, and you are riding a cyclocross bike everywhere you go, and your goal is just to complete the races. And you just said that was it. It was just for fun.
Oh, yeah.
When did it stop being just for fun?
I think it's not that it ever stopped being for fun, but I think I know where you're going, is that it became like a different kind of fun, or that I would get fun out of different expectations, setting goals, things like that. And that
you're familiar with the concept of type 1 fun and type 2 fun, right?
Yeah, right.
What's type 1 fun?
I may get it reversed, but type 1 fun is just like straight up, like dopamine, like this feels good, I'm having a great time, I'm laughing, hooray. And then type 2 fun is like,
hold on. Give me an example of type 1 fun. A safe for work example.
yeah, right. Yeah, because my head definitely did not go to safe for work initially, but yeah.
Shredding sweet single track and it's 70 degrees and sunny, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like easy pedaling on on just like a beautiful dirt road or something would be my type 1 fun. Yeah.
Okay, what's type 2 fun?
Yeah, so type 2 fun it's like a higher, it's type 2 because it's like higher up. It's the top shelf fun, which is it's like,
well, now here's an interesting analogy and perhaps a perfect one for where we're going with this. Top shelf fun. How would you describe top shelf fun?
So top shelf fun, type 2 fun would just be, pain. Finding like winning a bike race, by just torturing yourself, obviously, because that's how you win a bike race to some degree, is to torture yourself with the
I mean, I don't know any other way to do it.
Yeah. So that's
okay.
Type 2
So
fun.
now,
yeah.
First season of racing, is that type 1 fun?
I think it was type 1 fun, but by the end it had turned into type 2 fun, where I wanted to win races, and so it felt good to start really pushing myself and getting stronger.
Now, you said before that you weren't a sports guy. You didn't come from any kind of background of sports, right?
Yeah. When I first got into, when I first bought that cross bike, I had no plans to ever race a bike or be someone that was good at it by any means, or someone that was strong.
I see in my years of being around this sport, I'm going to still call it a sport for now, right? Being around the sport.
Oh yeah.
I know. I'm
not saying it's not a sport.
It's 2 people. There's 2 overarching character types that come into the sport of cycling, right? There are the following: someone who was a runner in high school, who ran cross country and or track, and perhaps completed in also a ball sport of some sort. So I did cross country, which I started doing so I could get in shape to play basketball. But then it turned out I was better at running than I was at playing basketball, because even at my comparatively giant size for a cyclist, I am not large enough to be a basketball player. I am a tall man, but
You're a tall man.
I'm not that tall. I could tell you, I'll tell you a story about being the starter on the 8th grade team, the starter on the 9th grade team, a starter on the 10th grade team, but getting to 11th grade and finding out that there was people who had already sort of been ahead of me. The analogy is you're the best Cat 5, the best Cat 4, and the best Cat 3, but once you get to 1, 2, you just ain't the best ever again. and in traditional sports like basketball, you can hit that barrier very, very fast as a young person. You can be 16 or 17 years old and find out that you're now you suck. Even though you were the best of anybody that you knew for a while, all of a sudden you suck. So then I actually ended up doing track. And then I got to a point in college where I was no longer interested in track, and I was riding my bike everywhere. And then somebody encouraged me to sign up for a bicycle race. And I didn't even do I mean, look, if you'd never done a road race before and just randomly showed up at a road race, you wouldn't do good at it. You just have no idea what would happen. And also, if you've just been running 400-meter hurdles for most of your life, you don't even have an idea about like how to deal with any of that. So, long story short, people come from a running background, and then they either got bored with running or they actually got hurt, and somebody got them on a bike saying this is a good way to get in shape or stay in shape while your knee is hurt, while you're rehabilitating so you can run again. And then a lot of the people never got back on the bike, or never got off the bike, excuse me. They never got off the bike, and they continued on as cyclists. There's a lot of people who come from some story like that. They were runners, or they were soccer players or something else. Jeremy Duran, who's a pretty legit elite cyclocross racer, an American cross racer, he races in Europe. He was a college baseball player and was just like a cycling enthusiast, but obviously is like a freak of nature athlete and got more and more honed into racing and has become a professional cyclist.
Yeah, totally. His brother just left a comment on my Instagram post like 10 minutes ago, and he seems like
his brother wrote on our team for a year, which is just the weird. This is probably a topic for another time, but the weird.
I want to hang out with him now. He seems super cool.
6 degrees of separation of cycling. Like if you know somebody who is an amateur cyclist, then you probably are related to the world champion through less than 6 degrees of separation. But it's not even 6 degrees in cycling. It's like 4 degrees. It's like,
which is why some people probably don't want cyclocross to actually grow, because it's so nice how cozy and inclusive and small it is.
It's true.
There's probably people that secretly don't want it to grow.
And I think that that's actually probably for the best, because it's such a strange and challenging activity. I don't think it does turn into, I don't think it turns into the Super Bowl. I don't think it turns into people every Saturday going out with their kids to do junior cyclocross instead of Little League. I don't think that's realistic. But the other type of person who comes to cycling, it's got to be the second most common, besides the I used to be a runner and now I like riding bikes, which is the person who says, I didn't like sports at all. I didn't like basketball. You could not get me to throw a football for $1,000. I didn't do running. Why would I do running? Running is stupid, right?
Yeah, totally.
But I got on the bike and I was like, to use your phrase, it was like I was flying. And what is it? So that's something that's unique to cycling. You don't get people who at 30 years old go out and get a softball glove and a softball bat and say, where has this been my whole life?
No.
Now, I've been skiing for many years, long before I was ever a serious bike rider. And I don't know anybody who's 30 who we take to Gore and put on a pair of skis and point them down the hill and they say, oh my God, I got to do this at least 10 more times this year. And by the end of the year, my goal will be doing, a race. No, nobody says that, right?
Yep.
So what do you think it is about it? You were from a background, you were DJing in nightclubs, right? You were a DJ, which was awesome.
Yeah. I've been an art student. I've been a DJ. I've been in bands.
And that's an entirely different subculture from like the athlete subculture, right? If you're going to this is probably a cheesy analogy, but if you're going to the high school analogy, right? There's the kids who were in the band and there's the kids who were the drama kids. And then there's like the school band, which is different potentially from like the kids who have a band that they play in a garage after school, right? And it might be some of the same people, but it's not the same. It's not the same experience.
Oh yeah, definitely way different. Yeah.
And then there's subcultures of the jocks, and then even within the jocks there's breakdowns, because like the football team is not the same as the cross country team for sure, right?
Yeah, right. Yep.
Okay, so then what is it about this activity? And I have a couple ideas, but I'd like to hear yours, that make people go, well, I'm an artist. And you're not the only person I know who comes from an art background who is an obsessive cyclist. Danny Goodwin is probably our like most famous example, right?
Yep. Another Nightcross OG.
An OG?
But it's all over, man. It's all over. Yeah.
Why do you get sucked in when you're like, I don't like sports? You're way down. You're like mainline in cycling now. You know, you're living it, right?
Oh yeah. I've definitely made reasonably big sacrifices in life to race bikes, I would say. Yeah.
So first, what do you think it is about it that sucks you in? Why do you get sucked in a way that now you can't put it down?
Yeah. There's definitely I think I can break it down into like a few reasons. I'll try and keep it tight. So number one, the community is, I don't know, it's a fit for me. The community is perfect. You can be friends with anybody right away on a bike, and people that ride bikes for some reason seem to, for the most part, kind of jive with my own brain, and kind of we speak the same language. That's a big part of it for me. That I immediately started making friends when I got on the cross bike and was doing shop rides. And that's, I don't know, that's a big part. I don't know why that is, but that never happened for me with team sports in high school or anything like that. I think it's just a freak sport. Like, it's, to me, I don't know, I'm still new to it, but I know that it's sort of a weirdo sport. Like, it doesn't really fit in with ball sports. It's kind of like on the outskirts of American culture. So that probably has something to do with it for me, because I'm definitely a bit of a freak.
There's a thing about it, right? You hit the nail on the head that it's not a typical thing, and I think that draws a lot of people to it because of the nature of it is that it's interesting to people because it's different.
I think initially the weirdness of it drew me in.
And have you noticed another trend, which is probably really consistent with it, but people who are cyclists are also into other weird, unique things? How many people do you know that are cyclists who are also at least kind of roughly into Formula One?
I guess you guys are into cars. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I so, you know, our state's leading official for years and years and years, Gary Toth, is like the most dedicated person to bicycle racing that exists probably in New York State. And if you asked him what his favorite sport is, he'd probably say Formula One, right?
Really?
Oh yeah.
Gary's a pretty cool dude. I wouldn't even be surprised. I wouldn't even be surprised if he said that. Now,
so there's that. It's this counterculture thing to begin with. So then it is drawing people who are kind of counterculturally disposed, if that's even a phrase. So you start out life as being into other stuff, and other stuff might be being in a band in high school instead of being on the football team, and that's really a gross oversimplification of how people's brains work. But then you move along in life and you get to this stage where you can actually afford to acquire, you know, some of the expensive machinery you need to do it, and then the next thing you know, you're sucked 100% into it. Do you feel like it's just a vacuum now, that your face is down in it and there's no, or being lifted up out of it, you know? But there's no way that you're stopping doing this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's given me so much joy the past 2 years that I've been doing it. In terms of racing and training, it's given me so much joy that it would be hard to set it down, for sure.
So we talked about the first season that you started doing this just for fun and just with the goal of doing races and participating, you know, and that's another thing that's actually interesting. Participation in cycling is not particularly rewarded. If you engage in triathlon, everyone is congratulated for completing their triathlon. And in certain levels, that is certainly absolutely logical. To complete an Ironman is a feat that I could never consider doing. Anyone who does that deserves to be congratulated. But sometimes people do a sprint triathlon that involves 100 feet of swimming, 300 feet of cycling, and then 10 feet of walking, and you get congratulated just the same.
It's not quite that. It's a little bit longer than that.
It's pretty short.
What is that called? That's called a sprint triathlon?
A sprint triathlon. Yeah, there are like super short triathlons.
Sprint is nominally like 500 yards of swimming, like 12 miles of bike, and a 5K.
So how long does that take to do for somebody who is showing up and averagely fast, not the Scott Birdsey of triathletes?
Hudson Crossing, where I came out of the water in like 140th place, I finished in an hour and 6 minutes, hour and 10 minutes, something like that.
Okay, so does everybody who does that deserve to get a trophy? And I'm not taking anything away from people who do that, of course, but talking about participation, cycling is a sport that doesn't reward participation in the traditional way. Triathlon, for example, is a sport that embraces you. Everybody who goes into a triathlon comes out and gets congratulated for finishing it. But if you enter a bike race, if you enter a road race and you get dropped on the first hill and then you ride the rest of the race, there's a fair chance that when you get to the finish, there will literally be no one there. They'll have already cleaned up and gone home, right? You ever have that happen to you?
Didn't they do participation medals at Bat and Kill?
Bat and Kill is a different animal. We'll cross that bridge in a special edition dedicated to Bat and Kills.
I know. I came in 20th that year.
I actually won Bat and Kill, but I got a...
that's pretty solid, actually.
Did you get a medal?
No, I don't remember. I can't see it on the medal wall.
I don't have a medal wall.
I'm married to a triathlete. Of course I have a medal wall.
I want a medal wall. That's pretty ill.
Right, exactly.
He may listen to this.
Okay, so okay, we're too far down the rabbit hole on this. We're bringing it back. So Scott, you are now at the point where you're training. How often?
Yeah, so this past year I was training, 10 to 15 hours a week, and for both cross and road, I was riding the Cat 3 races, and for cross in particular, I was definitely trying to win the Cat 3 races. I'm talking not the small Cat 3 races, like the big Northeast.
The big deal races.
Yeah, the Marathon races.
They're very competitive.
People races. Yeah, so my goal is to win those. Yeah,
the Victoria Series races.
Yep.
Okay, now. When you were racing,
presented by Cliff,
that first year you were racing a couple of years ago, and you were just participating and doing rides and just showing up. Now you're doing 15 hours a week, and you have a coach, right?
Yep, I did get a coach after those first 10 cyclocross races. I decided I was tired of losing to dudes that were crashing, but were just stronger than me. So I wanted to be strong, so I got a coach.
Now, at this point, do you see yourself just saying, never mind, I'm done racing?
My goals right now are really to just become like a Cat 1 and just race elite races, not having expectations to win any of the big ones, but just to know that I was able to push myself to that level where I was able to race with them and, maybe finish on a lead lap in a cross race. That's all I'm trying. That's all I'm after, basically. But, goals change from year to year, Next year it could be a totally different goal.
Don't change your goals. Hold on, relax. I'm not criticizing your goals. I'm thinking.
Well, I guess I was just finishing my own thought there. Like when I first started, like with those cross races, I never expected to actually win them. But then, then I did win. Like I said, I won that Bat and Kill Cat 5 race, and I was like, oh, maybe I can actually win races. And so then your goals start to change. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Now, would you think it's fair to say that now you're in the thick of it? You're that guy who is a top Cat 3, and you were making the next leap. Your goal is to make the next leap, right?
Yeah. So I'm a Cat 3 road and cross. I need like one upgrade point or something to go to Cat 2 and cross. But yeah, this year I'm hoping to upgrade to 2 on the road and, same for cross.
What do you think it would take to stop you from doing this? I don't mean not getting the points, but to say, I'm gonna go buy one of those fat bikes with the extra bags on it, and I'm just gonna go ride around and maybe camp and set a fire and sit there.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, I definitely differentiate just riding around for fun from like training riding, where you have that component of like analyzing your body's performance and upkeeping it and trying, like, like what Phil Gaiman says, like making your body your project. That's definitely a different thing than just riding around for fun. And yeah, I mean, it's an addictive road to go down.
You didn't answer my question. What do you think stops you from doing it?
I don't know, man, but that's the problem. That's the problem with.
Or I should say this, maybe not what stops you, because that suggests that there's some wall that you hit. What would cause you to say, I am satisfied with my participation in racing as a thing I do?
I don't know if anyone knows that before it's too late. That
might be the most insightful thing that we could say.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I think it's a healthy, like, passion for me. It's a constructive thing in my life, because I do truly feel like I just enjoy the process of doing it, as opposed to, even though the goals do change and maybe they get bigger in scope or whatever, I still enjoy the process of it, I guess. And I guess, what would stop me, and probably what stops most people, is they stop enjoying the process, which in this case, the process is, riding your bike every day and eating healthy and all that type of stuff, the type 2 fun.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now for me, we go back a number of years, but I was not able to have the meteoric rise in the ranks that you were. It took me a number of years to upgrade from Cat 4 to Cat 3. And for years and years and years, I just wanted to upgrade to Cat 3. And I basically said to myself, if I upgrade to Cat 3, I'll be done racing, because I'm never going to be a Cat 2. And, the process of just racing races going around in a circle as a Cat 3, knowing I'm not going to be a Cat 2, well, that's pointless, right?
Yeah. And
I literally got the Cat 3 sticker in the mail. This is in maybe 2005 or 2006.
Yeah.
The Stone Age is before electronic licenses.
Yeah. I had a physical license. I actually have it. It's a possession that I have because of the process. Everything that you just said is absolutely true. That process of learning to get my body to the point where I could do the things, and frankly mentally, because I don't think my power output changed all that much over the couple of years. It was the ability to just learn to turn yourself inside out, and then just do it again, and then just do it again, and then just do it again.
Yeah, how to put together a race. Yeah.
The second I had that sticker in my hand and put it on my license, the first thing I thought was, well, now I'm going to upgrade to Cat 2.
Right, yeah.
And now that didn't happen, probably because I ultimately had to take the bar exam and stopped riding my bike 20 hours a week, right?
Right.
But the interesting thing that I think you spell out in a perfect way is that you don't know what's going to stop you till it stops you, but you're sucked into it and you live it while you're doing it without knowing what's going to happen. I know that I raced 1, 2, 3 crits, even though if you told me beforehand that I was going to race 1, 2, 3 crits, I would have said, well, now I am a Cat 4, and even if I get a Cat 3 upgrade, I'll probably still race 3, 4 crits, because I'm not fast enough to do that. And I wasn't fast enough to do that. We would get smoked completely, but the whole point was to try, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to circle it back around here. We're trying to figure out if there's some meaning to the idea that cycling is a culture more than it is a sport. And I think the evidence that we have of that is, A, people come to it from all different places. It's not a collection of people who are playing softball because they played softball before, or playing football because they played football before.
Right.
But it's obviously a sport. There's no way around that, right? When the guy at Dick's asks me if I like sports, the answer is yes, because I like cycling, right? I also happen to like baseball, but that's besides the point, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's an athletic activity. It's definitely a sport. You're competing with other people. Yeah, it's a sport.
If you look at, so let's look at baseball for a second, right? The thing I like about baseball is frankly not so much like people hitting home runs, although look, I'm if somebody hits a home run, I get excited, right? Everybody does.
Oh yeah.
It's the chess game that plays out in a baseball field, that there's a guy who's there who's just fast, and if it's the ninth inning, they might just put him in to run from first base just to see if he can score. That you have to have your pitchers lined up in the right order, and you have to know who's going to hit, and the pitcher knows every pitch to throw to every batter, and the batters know what pitches their pitchers are going to throw to them, and what they're trying to do is they're just basically trying to guess on which pitch it's going to be, and that's actually what plays out, is that game of tactics in can you predict what the other guy is going to do and then maximize it. So when you see somebody crush a 450-foot home run, it means that he correctly predicted he was going to get a fastball up and in, and that's his favorite pitch in the world, and he hit it, right?
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's awesome. That's cool to hear.
That's like at the major league level. Now, look, when you're playing like Little League and Babe Ruth baseball, kids aren't necessarily doing that. But at the major league level, they're tracking all that, and the pitches are every pitch is called very specially for every hitter. They're not just out there whipping it back and forth. Not most of the time, right?
Sure.
There's a mental engagement there that exists in cycling that is missed, I think, by people who don't know about cycling, because you don't realize that when you're out on the road in a road race, there's 55 things going on at once. It's not just a horde of people just plowing along and whoever gets there first wins. Anybody who's ever watched a criterium can tell very quickly that this is not just a question of who the fastest rider is, right? If the fastest rider was the person who was going to finish, or, if the top three riders finished on the podium, there would have never been a time that I would have ever finished on a podium, even probably in a Category 4 or Category 5 race, right? It's all about knowing how to come around that last corner and do what you need to do, right? The thing about cycling that's difficult, the reason that it ultimately becomes prohibitive, is that it is this demanding lifestyle culture that you live, and the second you can't live it, I am proof of this, right? So we talked a lot about your racing and your training, and you were a guy who is right now in the thick of being a Cat 3 racer trying to go to the top level. I was that guy 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And I got that sticker on my license, and I said, the second I got it, if you told me 10 minutes before I got that, I would have said, I'll probably just race Cat 3 when I feel like it. Once I have this, I'll probably go do other stuff. That was actually in my brain. And then I got the sticker, and it was like, all they did was they just increased the size of the main line for the addiction, and I just immediately started to plot how I could become a Cat 2, right?
Sure.
But then some things developed that would have been foreseeable by anyone who was watching from the outside, and that was essentially having to graduate from law school and study for the bar exam and then practice law, right?
Yeah, totally. I could see that.
And those things are incongruous with upgrading to Cat 2.
Yeah.
And what happened was I raced for a couple more years, and this worked the first season, like after I hadn't really trained all that much, but I showed up at a couple races, and I raced on what I would say in my head was, well, look, I've been riding for a long time. I have like residual fitness. I did like 3 sets of intervals before the season started. I can show up and just like ride around in the pack, right? And you can kind of do that, actually, believe it or not. That works for a little while, but it doesn't work like for an entire season, and it certainly doesn't work for more than one season, right? And then you're like out of it. Like I can't go. I was looking through our Facebook messages to see if I could go back to when we actually had our first Facebook interaction, which I really don't remember what we said, but I remember it being like really amusing to me and knowing that we would be friends even though I didn't know you when I just read that one message.
Right.
And one of the things that I sent to you at one point was, do you want to go mountain biking? And it was like I was going to do a winter mountain bike ride with some of the other Nycross dudes. And your response was that you were doing the Andy Road ride because you were you're training. It was when this was the beginning of Scott Birdsey is a badass. And my response was that I couldn't do the road ride literally because I would be dropped in the first 10 miles, and that was probably generous. I would probably be dropped in the first 3 miles, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic. I think I probably really would be.
Yeah.
And I said, but I can ride single track with people because just riding single track is fun. Nobody's trying to get rid of anybody, and we can just all go out and ride around. What was I trying to say? I was trying to put a bow on it. I was trying to say.
You're getting.
Yeah, I was actually getting there. I was trying to get to the point that basically the difficulty in cycling, the thing that makes it this lifestyle sport that is a culture and it's not a thing you dabble in. That's it. It's not a thing you dabble in. you either do it and you do it 100%, or you just don't do it. And that's the unique thing about it. And when you go back to Hemingway, or whoever said it,
It's Hemingway.
it turns out it is Hemingway. My internet search said it was some other writer, and it's incorrectly attributed to Hemingway regularly. That was probably a bogus thing. I'm going to take mark on it. So Ernest Hemingway says the only sports that are out there are auto racing, mountain climbing, and bullfighting. And
Yep. And cyclocross.
our question is, does cyclocross get appended to that since now it exists? It didn't when he said that. And the answer is yes. Here's why. What Hemingway is getting at is that those are three activities that you do with 100% concentration because you can't do it otherwise. You cannot be a hobbyist mountaineer. You don't go climb K2 on a whim on a Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Nobody gets into a Formula One car. And certainly in Hemingway's day, what he was imagining as a race car is not what we are imagining with safety and carbon tubs. We're talking about a car that did not have a seatbelt and a driver who did not have a helmet.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on. I looked on Reddit. It's hang on, I lost it. There we go. I looked on Reddit. It's Ken Purdy.
Yes, there you go. I knew it was something like that. It was some other guy, right? But we can continue to attribute to Hemingway. Maybe we'll get some comments that way. Yeah, if we have to re-record some of this, we'll delete out all the parts where I say it's somebody else, and then we'll say.
No, I'll just say Kevin Purdy or
Kevin Purdy.
Every time I say it, you'll just dub yourself in saying that. That's perfect. So, okay.
Kevin Powell.
I love that we're trying to put a bow on it, and I'm actually coming up with something that maybe doesn't sound completely stupid, and you just interrupt me to tell me who it is after an hour of talking. Perfect. I lost my train of thought. Here's my point.
Damn, he committed suicide.
These activities that Hemingway is talking about, mountain climbing, auto racing, bullfighting, they're things you don't dabble in.
Yep.
You don't climb Everest or K2 like on a whim.
Right.
You don't, and especially in the context of what Hemingway is talking about, because, in that day and age, there's not equipment. Now you can pay somebody enough money to bring you up Everest if you're a rich guy and in modest shape.
Yep.
But in that day and age, nobody's doing those things without putting their life on the line. Bullfighting is, I would imagine, similar. I object generally to the idea of bullfighting, so I don't know. But I would imagine that you don't just sure. Let's put it this way. This weekend, I'm not going to be like, Scott, yo, I have an idea. Let's go do bullfighting. Like, nobody's going to ever say that, right?
No. Cyclocross should just replace the bullfighting. That should be what happens.
What happens, right? There are only 3 real sports: cyclocross, auto racing, and mountaineering. The rest are merely games. That's your nice. 21st century version of that quote, which may or may not be an Ernest Hemingway quote.
That's awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Amateur Hour CX. You can find Scott on Twitter at Scott Birdsey and on Instagram at Scotty_Birds with a Z. When he's not racing bikes, he's a freelance web designer, so you should check out his work at scottbirdsey.com. And keep an eye on rift.bike for his new cycling clothing label. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at mwalling. You can't find Eric on the internet, something about phone parties. But if you found this enjoyable, please make sure to subscribe in your podcast player so you get our next episode. Thanks. See you then.